Good evening, my FPV friends. Today we are looking at this motor. It is a Hyperlite 2205 1722 kV, specifically for 6S on 5-inch, and it is called the Merica motor for obvious reasons. Comes from Pyrodrone, Hyperlite, and it just arrived today. I ordered just 4 to test them out, and they were delayed a couple of weeks. I'll explain why shortly, but before I get into it any further, I have a couple of, let's just say, contenders that I am bringing into the bench here so I can offer some comparisons between these motors and a couple of things that we need to do to compare. But first of all, looking at the motor by itself, it is this is a low budget motor. It is a really good racing motor for people that tend to break motors often because racing is kind of brutal. It is 15 bucks, I believe, $14.99 if I'm not mistaken, but it's a direct derivative of this motor, which is $13.99, and it's been their Team Edition motor, which used to be brown or bronze for the longest time, now with a new belt. This is simply a new edition of the motor with a titanium solid shaft, which increases the price by $1, which is pretty surprising. The motor has all the nice bells and whistles of modern motors with curved magnets, very tight gaps, so on and so forth. But to reduce the cost, it has a circlip in the back versus a screw, which honestly, many times I do prefer that. And it has a solid shaft instead of a hollow shaft because a hollow shaft does add a lot of cost. It is a 25 gram motor with the long wires. Normally with a short wire, if you weigh it around here, it's about 23 grams, which is very light. It's very comparable to a 2204 motor, but with a little bit more extra oomph and torque that you get from a 2205. I really like the old version of it. I just got a set of these two recently. They're on a quad, so I'm going to be tying them up, but they're basically the same inside. And I have high hopes for this on 6S because I enjoy keeping my weight down. Instead of running a 1300, I'll be running a 1000. Because I'm trying to get a lightweight 6S build ready and going. I prefer the less weight for better precision flying instead of just brute force. To me, that's just my style, and I hate crashing. You can't really win races if you're on the ground, so I prefer going with a lighter quad if possible. Now, what we're gonna look at here is a couple things. First of all, if we compare it to the motor this came from, it has a solid aluminum shaft, and I believe it's steel down there. Same deal with this guy, only a titanium at the top. But it has a solid shaft. This is a little bit stronger. It does add to the cost. Now, when you compare it to their Team Edition 2204 motor, which has been running for a long time as the Floss Edition motor, this one has a hollow titanium shaft. I also have here the 2207, which is basically the daddy of them all, well, until now that they have a 2207.5. But this one also has the hollow titanium shaft. It has a higher cost. It has a screw in the bottom instead of having a circlip, even though I have mixed feelings about that. And it's been a very good motor. I have had mixed results with them, and I'll explain why in a second. Mainly has to do with the bearings, but also because I'm pretty hard on them. But also because I mainly fly Brother Hubbard made motors. So if I'm gonna have any problems with the motors that I actually fly. There have been versions of motors that I bang the crap out of them and I cannot damage them to save my life. And some that are kind of fragile, it kind of comes and goes. It kind of depends on luck sometimes, but the version of, actually I have one here that's pretty beat up. This guy I marked with black because I know it's bad, but for some reason I've beat these motors just like within an inch of their lives, and they still fly. Sometimes they're a little bit bent and they're fine. Where I've had versions of this one where my bearings have gone bad, and some that are perfectly fine. You got to think about it when you crash into concrete and things like that. Sometimes the bearings will fail, so I'm not surprised. And I'm not surprised of the variances between some in terms of how some will last longer than others. Now, one thing we got to keep in mind here, which is very important, is the issue with the hollow shaft versus the solid shaft. Before we go there, this motor, there was a delay in the production, and the reason why I had to wait a couple of weeks to receive it, there was an issue where this version in the titanium shaft was bending the shaft below inside the motor. And I think the reason for it, I heard from Serge from Pyro, is that the strength of this shaft was overcoming the strength of the bottom shaft and causing it to bend, where not on this one. So apparently this is a new version with reinforced materials, and it should be fine. Now when it comes to bending the top shaft, you would think, hey, you know, a solid shaft has more material, so it should be harder to bend than something that's hollow. But when you think about the physics of it, that's not the case. Let's think about it this way. If you have a tube, a metal tube for a pipe for water or whatever, or a handrail, if you try to bend a metal tube, it is a lot harder to bend than, say, a solid tube like rebar of the same thickness. And the reason is you have 4 walls of tension that you have to bend. On here, you have 2 walls, one on the one side, one on the other side, and you only have to bend 2 walls. Where on a motor like this, you have 4 walls in the shaft, 1, 2, 3, 4, you know, inside the shaft, you count them, and it makes it harder to bend, just like a pipe. As simple as that. Not only that, it reduces the weight while making it stronger, which is very cool. Now, these motors are lower in price, and they use circlips, and basically they have a solid shaft at the bottom, and it's drilled hollow down to a certain point. The diameter of the bearings, which I don't remember right now what they are, doesn't really allow for a thicker shaft down there, so you can't really drill it all the way through. There are other motors that, let's say like the X-Nova Lightning series, they have a bigger bearing and the shaft can be thicker at the bottom, which means you can drill all the way through, and you end up with a motor that is fully hollow at the bottom. I have a video about that I haven't released yet, but it should come out soon. And it makes it stronger because your entire shaft is now hollow and it has 4 walls, of course, which makes the motor a lot stronger. But it also adds to the cost. Regardless, I've been very happy with all these motors, and I expect good things about the Merica. I ordered only 4 to test them out, and honestly, I probably should order more of them because I think it is going to be my favorite size for this kind of quad. And yeah, I don't think I'm missing really anything else. I think they have NSK bearings versus ESO, if I'm not mistaken, again, to keep the cost down. I like how they put the markings on the base rather than the bell, because all these motors, you have the markings on the bell. When you damage a bell and you have to replace it, you end up with either a bell that does not match the numbering, even though the bell is the same, or you end up with a blank one. Where these new ones, you can just replace the bell with just a blank bell because your numbering is there, 1722 kV and 2205 kV. Now, for those of you that don't know, the kV of a motor is determined by the windings, so it really has nothing to do with the bell. And the bell is kind of dependent on the height of the motor and the width, of course, because it needs to fit over it. But it could also be kind of loose if the fact that the bell could actually be a little bit taller than the stator itself, even though on these motors you don't have that. But essentially the size of the bell really depends on the size of the motor stator, but the kV is totally in the winding. So you could take one of these motors that comes with a bunch of different kV versions and swap out bells like there's no tomorrow, and it's all the same. The kV is in the base. It's in the stator itself. So there you have it. This is going to be my first 6S build, actually. And I'm really looking forward to running them and see how I like them. But here's a pretty good general impression of the Merica 2205. But by the way, they do have this 2207 of that color as well. And I believe this is a 1-run thing. So once they're gone, they're gone. If I break one motor, I'm going to have to start mixing in these. So thank you. Good night.